This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Well, it's good to be back in the regular flow of things. Temporarily. You know, I can honestly say that WrestleMania 41 did an absolute number on me. As did it for a lot of other people. You know, for me, it was just about eating up an entire weekend. With all the preparation that goes into me doing these shows, the little amount of free time that I actually have during the week. I mean, yes, I could have hypothetically done a Friday show last week if I set aside like 5 hours on Saturday and Sunday to try to cram in watching all three shows. But you know, on top of having to record the audio for both nights of WrestleMania, doing the editing on Monday night to upload it on Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, it was more trouble than it was worth. I'm just not at the point now where I was a few years ago where I could legitimately find time throughout the week to sit down and watch the shows and do all the recordings on like Thursday night, Friday morning. I'm just way too busy now. And way less energetic. It's crazy. It only took me 3 years. All of a sudden, I've aged to like 15 to 20. I'm lethargic, tired, cranky. Well, I've always been cranky. Mostly lethargic. But you know what, man? We're here. We're here, and you know what time it is. It's another Friday installment of classic wrestling coverage here on the Five Starr Wrestling Report. You all know the channel mantra by now. We are the wrestling show nobody knows but everybody needs. Here to spread the good word of classic wrestling and remind everybody of a time when the business didn't totally suck. Now, sure, there were still plenty of rotten things that happened, but at least the ring mats weren't plastered with sponsor logos. You know, I will say, as much griping as I do about these retro Raws, it is nice to actually see a WWF canvas that isn't totally splattered in logos and sponsor plugs and God, just junk. I don't have to constantly be reminded of all the products that I'm supposed to like because WWE said so. I mean, they're just... Yeah, I keep talking about it. The more I see of modern wrestling, the less I'm inclined to keep up with it. It's really that bad. Like, I didn't ever think it would be this bad. 2025 has been a revelation year for me, brother. Everything post-Elimination Chamber and post-heel Cena. It's been a massive wake-up call for me and I think a lot of other people. Everything I've said about Dwayne, you know, everything when it comes to the double standard hypocrisy of wrestling fans that were so angered when people like me try to sit here and criticize the Cena heel turn, how The Rock's involvement in the whole fiasco made no sense from the get-go. And all those same people that were griping and moaning about people like me blaming The Rock for stuff back then. Well, now the shoe's on the other foot. Wouldn't you know it? Now that people are finally realizing that Rock is nothing but a greedy prick. Oh, well, now it's okay to criticize him. Now that the stories are coming out about him deciding not to involve himself with WrestleMania because he didn't think it was necessary. It's just... You know, people will call into question why the only podcasters that I follow anymore are people like Jim Cornette and Brian Last. It's because those guys are the only ones that are able to see through all the bullshit. They can see the fire off way in the distance before everybody else. I mean, at least long before anybody's willing to have the conversation. I've read the comments. All the people that blistered Brian when he sat there on Jim's show and called out The Rock for his BS. And everybody was on his case about him being anti-Rock and behind the eight ball. Well, who's behind the eight ball now? It's all the marks that thought The Rock should have been given the benefit of the doubt. All the same people that praised Rock at the Elimination Chamber because he secretly had this all planned out from the start. That this was some giant long-term story that dated all the way back to last fall. Those very same people are now sitting here saying none of it was ever planned out. It was all Rock going into business for himself. Telling you, man, wrestling fans are some of the dumbest people on the planet. They really are. I hate to admit it, but it's the truth. You know, 1 minute they're singing the praises of guys like Triple H and Dwayne for being these genius minds that are 10 steps ahead of everybody else. Then once people finally wake up and realize that they don't have a fucking clue what they're doing, well, now it's perfectly okay to call them out. Again, just another case study of why just do my own thing here. I don't engage with other podcasters. I don't have the energy nor the patience to deal with it. To me, it's just more trouble than it's worth. Several years ago, I'd have been willing to have the conversation with some people. You know, try to reach out and do a little bit of networking. Looking for ways to kind of grow this channel and be part of the community. I'm more content being the lone wolf kind of podcaster. Let me come on here, do my own thing, talk about the stuff that I'm passionate about talking about, and do as little focus on modern wrestling as I possibly can. Because God, is that stuff atrocious. I seriously need to wonder how people sit down and do Raw and SmackDown reviews. How do you have the patience for it? What is there to even talk about half the time? I don't know. I really don't get it. But why don't we get into our show, shall we? Let's talk about this Saturday TBS show from WCW. And with me actually having watched everything inversely over the past week, meaning that I watched WCW last as opposed to watching it before Midsouth or World Class, well, the show is a lot fresher in my memory. It's not to say anything truly substantial happened on the program. There really wasn't a whole lot going on this week. You know, we're still in that phase of relatively shorter TBS syndicated shows over the next few weeks. I think up until like early June. A lot of these Saturday TBS shows are only an hour in runtime. And I think there was always a rationale for a lot of these shorter episodes during the month of May, but I can never recall what the circumstances were. But, well, fuck me. I didn't realize that we're only 8 days out from the WrestleWar pay-per-view. That came up a lot faster than I was anticipating. Oh, God. Which means next week we're going to be doing the pay-per-view recap instead of talking about the next TBS show. And I'm also saying this with the knowledge that I'm going to be out of town through most of next week. So at what point am I actually going to sit down and not only watch the pay-per-view, but do the recordings of all three of the retro segments? You know, it's a good question. I do not have an answer to that currently. But if I know anything about my ability to be flexible, I can make just about anything work. Even if it involves me not sleeping and or being an emotional train wreck for 48 hours. So anyway, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, the syndicated show. Well, as you know, we didn't review Saturday TBS last week. So I went into this one foolishly thinking that they were going to recap some stuff, give me a reminder of what I missed the other week, just to get caught back up to speed. Well, then I quickly realized, oh yeah, it's WCW in 1989. So whatever they aired on the show 7 days ago, none of it made its way on this show in any capacity. Even as a recap. We started with Ric Flair joining up with JR at the interview station. And Flair had his eye candy with him this week. JR with a great comment. I see you're in deep training. Hey man, we all know Flair's lifestyle. That man could work out for 5 hours a day, work an hour Broadway with Steamboat on a house show, fuck a few women on the side, get back in the gym for another hour or two to do some cardio. He still wouldn't be blown up. So he spent a couple minutes talking about the big showdown with Steamboat at the WrestleWar pay-per-view next week. There's all the usual Flair jingoisms. He's going to walk the aisle, live life in the fast lane, jet airplanes, lovely women, custom suits. You know the deal. And as he's celebrating with the girls, Steamboat starts walking up to the interview station. Flair's obviously decked out in his custom gray suit, looking like $1 million champ. Meanwhile, Steamboat's up there with fucking jeans and a pullover sweater, looking like he's getting ready to mow the lawn. And so he does a very dry speech, tells Flair that he's not here to demean his morals or values, but he's still the world champion and he's still the one in the driver's seat. It's like, I mean, the actual confrontation wasn't bad, but this is just a textbook example of the heel outclassing and outshining the babyface in every conceivable way. Yeah, there were still chants for Steamboat. Yeah, the people reacted positively when he came out and held up the world title for everybody. You know, but Flair's still getting these massive babyface pops. He's got these 3 smoking hot dames by his side. Just, I mean, everything about him oozes cool. And like I said, Steamboat's there looking like he's getting ready to go fetch the mail. It was just a very unflattering presentation of your top babyface world champ. That's all I'm saying. Oh, by the way, that was your hard sell for the main event in 8 days. That is how they hyped Flair and Steamboat for the final encounter. A 3-minute segment where the babyface champ got overshadowed by the heel challenger. Way to go. So then we get Trent Knight versus Bob Orton Jr. I didn't know Trent Knight was a Pittsburgh native. Was he one of those Dominic DeNucci pupils? If so, then Dominic should be ashamed of himself. Because Trent Knight sucked. So here's the gist of what happened here. They ring the bell to start the match. Gary Hart went over to do color with JR. And about 10 seconds later, JR informed Gary of a situation that has evolved in the locker room. An emergency that apparently required Gary Hart to be present. That was literally all the information they unveiled. Something happened and you need to go. And this was apparently such a major crisis that Gary just very nonchalantly walked in front of the hard cam and tried to go behind the curtain to see what was up. Not really in any kind of massive hurry. And a few more seconds go by. And who should run out from behind the curtain but Dick Murdoch with a bull rope. He's going after Gary Hart on the floor and trying to choke him out with the bull rope. And this part was actually kind of funny. You see Bob Orton look over and see Murdoch on top of Gary, throwing down punches. And he does one of those cartoon animations where he kind of stutters his head and realizes, oh shit, that's my manager. It was such a Scooby-Doo moment. The only thing missing from it was the spring bounce sound effect. Once Orton took a second glance and realized, yup, that's Gary Hart getting beaten up right now. So he runs out and tries to pull Dickie off. And then he ends up getting run to the back himself before Murdoch makes his way over to the interview station. And that's where Murdoch goes ahead and plugs the match with Orton for next week on the 7th. Texas Bull Rope match. Murdoch versus Orton. He's tired of getting beat down. He's tired of the sneak attacks. Tired of the 2-on-1 handicaps. Next week is when Murdoch plans to stomp a mud hole in Bob Orton and walk it dry. And if Gary Hart wants to try to stick his nose in it, he'll have a face full of cowbell to eat. Pretty good old school Southern style babyface promo. I still have like virtually no memory of this feud ever happening in 1989. But it is apparently one of the bigger draws for this WrestleWar pay-per-view. Guess my memory isn't as photographic as I recollect. From there, we come back for the Junkyard Dog versus Ron Simmons. My very first note reads, why is Teddy Long the fucking official? All in caps, by the way. Just to stress the absurdity of it all. So yeah, they're still doing this bullshit heel ref stuff with Teddy. For those of you asking, is it as bad as it might sound? The answer is yes. It's fucking garbage. The heel ref storylines have always been garbage in wrestling. There has never been a time in the history of this profession where it's ever gotten anybody more over as a result, including the official. It also made this match very confusing because I'm pretty sure Ron Simmons was supposed to be a babyface. But then once the dog started getting in Teddy's face and kind of calling him out for all his biased officiating, well, all of a sudden Ron started working more like a heel. Which, yes, does make sense if you consider that Teddy later on winds up becoming Ron Simmons' manager as a part of Doom. But it didn't really help to explain why Simmons shook the dog's hand before the opening bell. Is he one of those tweeners? Made up terminology. So they have this brutally awful fake looking fight. They're just rolling around on top of each other, applying these obviously fake looking choke spots. And it ends with the dog pushing Simmons into the corner. There's a horribly awkward spot where Simmons goes to shove the dog. Dog takes this comically terrible bump for it. Simmons gets on top of the dog for the pin. Teddy does the fast count. I wrote, "This was asshole." And it all led to Jim Herd showing up to inform everybody that he is now canning Teddy Long as an NWA official. Notice how he didn't outright fire Theodore. He just said, Teddy is no longer an NWA referee. So, again, storyline advancement for what they're about to set up with Teddy as a manager later on. I guess my only question in all this, if we're looking for continuity, how exactly did it take Jim Herd this long to make this call? He never automatically put two and two together after Teddy fucked the Road Warriors out of the World Tag Belts. He had to wait until this show to be like, yeah, I see what's going on. This Teddy Long is obviously going into business for himself. Gee, I'll tell you, man, that Jim Herd can really sense when something's aloof. Nothing gets by him. All the while, they just signed Nick Patrick as a referee not that long ago. Talk about not being able to see the forest from the trees. So, coming out of that, we had the Great Muta going over Lee Scott in a TV squash. It was all the usual stuff we've been talking about with Muta since he showed up. He's a heel, but everything he does is so visually impressive. So, despite the fact that the people are supposed to hate him, he gets cheered at like one of the biggest baby faces on the roster. Yeah. He went over with a moonsault. And that was followed with this Persian dumbbell lifting contest between the Iron Sheik and the Stinger. Didn't Sting make it clear in a promo a few weeks ago that he did not want to partake in the Sheik dumbbell challenge? Now he's here getting ready to partake in said challenge. Well, he changed his mind. And as it actually turns out, the Stinger was playing Sheik for a fool here. So, well, they have Sheiky come out to do a demonstration just to make sure that Sting understands how the weights are intended to be swung. And it basically turns into a comedy shtick where Sting keeps asking for Sheik to do another demonstration because he's a slow learner, wants to make sure he has proper form. And by the end of it, Sheik ends up blowing himself up by lifting the dumbbells overhead 1,000,000 times. And finally, Sting tells him, well, Sheiky, There is no doubt that you are the best at lifting those weights. But at WrestleWar, you're going to get out-wrestled by the Stinger. So yeah, he duped him. And I think the only thing that would have made this better is if Sheik went to do the final demonstration and then fell over as a result of being too tired. That would have at least made the heel look like an idiot. But they had the germ of an idea here. I just don't think it really came together like it should have. I also then realized, oh boy, I'm going to have to review Sting versus the Iron Sheik on pay-per-view for the World Television title. That sounds hideously repugnant. There's no way that match goes any more than 2 minutes, right? Is the Iron Sheik even capable of wrestling a match longer than 2 minutes on pay-per-view? Guess we'll find out in a week. Based on that beer gut, I wouldn't be betting money on it. And then we had a tag squash with Greg Evans and George South taking on the Samoan SWAT team. It was during this match where JR made the announcement that next week we will be seeing the debut of the Dynamic Dudes. Upon hearing that news, I immediately groaned. I knew it was coming. I just wasn't mentally prepared to hear the announcement. Really not much to say about this particular match. Samu gave Evans a belly-to-back suplex from the middle rope. Tagged in Fatu so he could hit a big splash for the 3. You know, obviously with the Midnight Express being out of the picture for the time being, it kind of put the Samoans at a brief standstill until they could find another babyface team to feud with. Enter Shane Douglas and Johnny Ace on their totally rad skateboards. And it was at this moment that I instantly realized this is the official low point of WCW's tag division. So then we went back over to JR for an interview with Ricky Steamboat, which in turn then became another altercation between him and Flair. And well, here's precisely everything I wrote down about it. Steamboat regurgitated most of his talking points from Seg 1. Talked about Flair being a master manipulator and someone that still thinks he's 10 steps ahead of everybody else. Then Flair came out with his arm candy and regurgitated most of his talking points from Seg 1. He's the nature boy. He's a limousine-riding, jet-flying, kiss-stealing, wheelin'-dealing son of a gun. And by the time this segment ended, I just asked myself, was there a point to this? There was nothing said or addressed here that was not already talked about in the very first confrontation. This was the epitome of time filler. And when you need to throw in time filler material on a 40-minute show as it is, that's an indication you need some more interesting shit happening on your show. I mean, they didn't even get into a brief shoving match. It was just more talking. And not even particularly good back and forth. It's like they said, "Hey, Steamboat, we know you got outshined there a while ago. How about you try to go back out there and redeem yourself?" And then Steamboat went out there and struck out a second time. We had a promo from the Total Package. talking about his upcoming U.S. title defense with Michael Hayes next week. They glossed over some recent comments that I guess Michael Hayes made, where he was talking about Buddy Roberts and Terry Gordy, kind of throwing them under the bus, basically saying he never needed those two to get ahead in the wrestling business. And it's one of those plain textbook examples of they're trying so hard to dissociate Hayes from any involvement with the original Freebirds that you just know they're planning to bring them back later on in the year. Now, granted, we didn't get Buddy Roberts. We got Jimmy Garvin instead, which was quite the experience. But that's like the big standout with Michael Hayes right now. Like, you watch him during the singles run in '89, and you can't help but think, how long until they eventually try and recreate the Freebirds? Because Michael Hayes as a singles guy just doesn't work. Oh, sure enough, by the summertime, we got the fabulous Freebirds back. Just wasn't the version anybody was particularly asking for. So we had Hayes taking on Steve Casey this week. Oh, by the way, I did not write a single thing down about that Luger promo. The only thing I noted about it was how oiled up Luger was. Literally for a 60-second interview, guy basically doused himself with an entire bottle of baby oil for that. He didn't even work a match this week. So Hayes bumped around and sold for Casey early on. Then he cut him off, threw him out to the floor, beat him up for a minute, threw him back in, and hit the DDT for the pin. And that left us with the remaining bit of airtime for the Varsity Club versus Eddie Gilbert and Rick Steiner. What I eventually came to realize was a World versus U.S. Tag Team Champion versus Champion match. And they gave it like 4 minutes and change. With all the history between Mike Rotunda and Rick Steiner, here they are on television wrestling each other for approximately 90 seconds. The same two guys that were a headline feature of Starrcade 88. God, nobody ever talks about how badly WCW dropped the ball with Rick Steiner. It cannot be understated. They royally fucked up Rick Steiner. Bad. Like, he should have been in World Championship title contention in 1989. Bad. I mean, the match was fine for the several minutes it got. But can you imagine how much better it would have been if it got some time? Probably would have also made the DQ finish not come off so rushed and manufactured. Right as Eddie gets the hot tag, he rolls out to the floor, wherein we see Kevin Sullivan try to go after him and Missy Hyatt with a pair of scissors to try to cut their hair. And it's ridiculous because, Sullivan's standing over Missy for like 10 to 15 seconds holding these scissors up. But you could clearly tell he's just standing there waiting for it to get cut off by Eddie and the Road Warriors. And then we get this absolutely terrible brawl sequence where the Road Warriors are out there walk fighting with Dr. Death and Rotunda. Like, at one point you see Animal give Williams a little nudge with the toe of his boot, and Williams just walks away, no-selling the attack. And, well, that's how the show went off air. The Varsity Club got run off to the back in what was essentially a 4-on-2 attack. Advantage babyface. So someone clearly did not think that through before putting it on television. I'm really struggling to remember what it's setting up for the pay-per-view next week. If I remember right, I think it's the Road Warriors versus Dr. Death and Rotunda for the World Tag Belts. And then Gilbert and Steiner versus Sullivan and probably Spivey for the U.S. Tag Straps. By the way, can anybody remember why Dan Spivey hasn't been on the show in several weeks? Not that I'm complaining that we haven't seen Spivey around. Good fucking lord. But like the fact that he's just absent from the show with no explanation. Was he hurt? Was he just not around for this particular taping block? Not sure. But I do, for whatever reason, recall him being on the WrestleWar pay-per-view. Maybe he just shows up to be in the Varsity Club's corner. I have no fucking idea. The only memorable part of that WrestleWar event to me was Flair and Steamboat. Everything else is a total blur. Much like a lot of this late spring, early summer period for WCW. But that'll be the big review next Friday. On top of Midsouth and World Class, which I'll have to find time to fit in during this weekend. It is going to be a jam-packed 2 days of let's cram in a bunch of wrestling to plan out a podcast approximately 5 to 6 days out. Those are the sacrifices that need to be made. Especially when I work a full-time gig, teach on the side, and hopefully we'll have another part-time gig that'll be added to the overbloated schedule as it is, which will in turn become more like a second full-time gig. Am I going to cut anything from the review series? Probably not. Should I? Probably. But I love torturing myself. What can I say? It's all in good fun. And lack of any reasonable sleep. And we will go ahead and pick up with Mid-South Television. Again, a week removed since we didn't cover last week. And boy, did we start this week's show with a banger. No, I'm not referring to a wrestling match. No, I'm not referring to any kind of promo or angle. I'm referring to JR's announcement. In the process of hyping up the Summer Superdome show for mid-June, he also informed us of the special sweepstakes contest. The Super Date at the Superdome. Wherein some lucky ladies are going to get the chance to win a date with the Rock and Roll Express. God, as soon as I heard Jim drop that bombshell, I immediately started having PTSD flashbacks to 1986. If you watch the Crockett reviews from 86, you know what I'm talking about. I think it was during the Summer Bash tour where they were doing those sweepstakes challenges for the opportunity to win a date with Ricky and Robert. Literally the same thing they were promoting here. And that Rock and Roll Win a Date contest was so goddamn bizarre. It's been so long, I don't even remember how the whole thing went down. All I remember is that they were very strict in making sure that anybody that applied to the contest was 18 years of age or older. Because, well, yeah. Wouldn't want to hold the company liable for lawsuits. But I also remember it was like 2 or 3 different kinds of date contests. And they made such a huge deal about it at the time, and they never did it again. Funny how that works. So, again, with us missing last week, there was a bit of continuity that I was missing out on here. But they did a relatively good job explaining some of the big angles that happened last week. We had a Terry Taylor, Bill Watts pre-tape at ringside to kick things off. And Taylor's obviously still confined to the neck brace after what we saw 2 weeks ago in the TV title match with Khrushchev, when Butch Reed had pow-driven Taylor on the concrete. And Taylor came back out with a neck brace to try to battle Khrushchev anyway, and he wound up suffering defeat. But apparently last week, Hacksaw Duggan was in a title match against Crusher Khrushchev, and Taylor was scheduled to be the color commentator. And again, we all know the regulations with Midsouth when it comes to guys working commentary roles. If they leave the announce position and try to get physical in the matches, then they're subject to a fine. So what happened was the Russians tried to hold Duggan down and shave his beard. And because Taylor remembers the last time the Russians had tried to take out Duggan, well, he saw that situation and said, "Fuck it, I'll pay the fine." So he ran down and lent a hand to Duggan. It is kind of funny in a way to think that Terry Taylor would rather pay a $2,500 fine to help Hacksaw, even though all the Russians were attempting to do was shave off his beard. He does realize it's hair, right? It'll grow back. Especially Hacksaw's. Duggan doesn't seem like the kind of guy that would have trouble growing facial hair in a few weeks. But, well, he also explained, or should I say attempt to explain, the status of his neck injury. He basically fumbled and stumbled around to come up with the conclusion, "I have severe neck compression problems. So the doctors are advising that I keep the neck brace on for the time being." That's essentially what he said. There was just a lot of incoherent stuttering at play. I like Terry Taylor, but he was never a great promo. But that was all well done. Good recap and good follow-up with the Taylor-Russian situation. We'll just overlook the visual of Taylor standing out there looking like a teenage dork getting ready to go to math class. A red and yellow striped shirt with big-ass reading glasses. And a neck brace on top of that. He just screamed, "Geek." And from there, we transition over to another pre-taped interview, this time with JR and Jim Cornette. And we learned here that JC has a special announcement he wanted to make regarding the Midnight Express for this week's program. He explains that he's sick and tired of standing around and watching all the top guys get spoon-fed title matches. It's time for the young talent to shine, damn it. And since the Midnights are the current reigning Mid-South Tag Team Champions, Cornette took it upon himself to meet with Grizzly Smith over the past week and get 3 open contracts signed. Yes, sir, that's right. The Midnights will be defending their titles this week. Not once, not twice, but thrice. But there's a catch. Of course, there had to be parameters to it. It wasn't going to be that much of a cakewalk. And so he basically spends the next minute running down pretty much every vulnerable threat on the roster, saying they're all excluded from competition. Stagger Lee, Bill Watts, Terry Taylor, Hacksaw Duggan, Magnum TA, Dr. Death, the Rock and Roll Express. They're all exempt. But anyone else can sign the contract. Well, ain't that Jimmy Cornette a swell gentleman? Sure, he's practically omitting any suitable competition. But at least he's willing to show his guys aren't paper champions, am I right? Right. So that probably took us to the first match in the Midnight's bout. And I honestly can't tell you which visual I found more hilarious. Boyd Pierce in a lime green suit with fucking hideous jacket designs. Or the fact that the Midnight's opponents here were Greg Kozlov and a name I'm not making up, Jason Whacker. Yes, he actually thought that using the last name Whacker was a good idea. That nobody was going to mock him for that. Well, he was wrong, because I'm mocking him for it. By the way, what did Jim say here? That Boyd looked like an Easter basket without the jelly beans? You know, now that I think of it, he wasn't entirely off base. So, Watts basically acknowledged how much of a joke the whole thing is. He didn't even try to give the job guys any credibility. Unsurprisingly, Bobby and Dennis made quick work of him. They went over with the Gravedigger in about 2 minutes. Pretty short and sweet. And then we came back for round 2. You got Bobby and Dennis doing some calisthenics to stay fresh, because he knew they were going to need it for the next round. They were taking on Tony Torres and John King, by golly. And John King's made a lot of progress in Mid-South as of late. He's almost actually gotten visual pins over people. Kidding aside, same basic premise. Bobby and Dennis beat them both down in quick fashion, and they ended up pinning King with a modified Doomsday. Now here's where things get interesting as we go into the third open contract. We hear from Watts at the announce booth, courtesy of Grizzly Smith. The final contract has been bought out. And while the Midnights don't know this yet, we the audience are informed before break that the Midnight's opponents will now be Mr. Wrestling and his new protege, Mr. Wrestling 2, aka Hercules Hernandez. Or at least, that's what we were led to believe. And even before they cut the break, my immediate reaction to it was, there's no way. That's gotta be a swerve. They wouldn't just randomly do heel versus heel in a cold TV match with 30 seconds of build-up. Not in this era. But then you look at the situation and think, well, you know, Jim never excluded Mr. Wrestling from the conversation. Apparently he just assumed because he's a heel now, he was going to be on Corny's side. So even in that sense, you could still make logic out of it. I liked when Jim finally came to the realization of that in real time. He tries to argue with Boyd and go, "That's not right. I made a list." Then he pauses and looks down and goes, "They weren't on the list." Then he turns back to him and keeps ranting again. Great comedic timing. And of course, as we come to find out, Mr. Wrestling and Hercules were not the ones that came out here. Instead, it was Ricky and Robert wearing Wrestling 2 masks. Either that or Mr. Wrestling and Hercules really slacked off in the gym over the last couple weeks. And apparently shrunk in size. I just laugh when they try to reveal that it was the Rock and Roll here, and they're trying to take their masks off. Fucking Robert Gibson could not get this goddamn mask off. You know, it's supposed to be this ha-ha revelation where everybody sees it's the Rock and Roll and they get the evident pop. Poor Robert's over in the corner for like 2 minutes trying to finagle with this fucking mask. So it totally killed the whole spot. It was funny, though. Hopefully he learned a valuable lesson. Don't over-tighten your masks. But the match is obviously a lot of fun. They did all the usual midnight rock and roll spots we come to expect. Flurry of offense early on from the baby faces. Heat on Robert, which is a little bit of a twist. And eventually Ricky gets the big hot tag and starts making the comeback. Robert gets dumped over the top rope to the floor behind the ref's back, so the match isn't waved off. And while Ricky's getting set up for the double team spot, Robert sneaks over from the other side and helps Ricky battle out. And while Robert has Dennis stacked up in a cradle pin, Ricky gives Bobby the big superplex off the top and scores the 1-2-3. And just like that, we have new Mid-South Tag Team Champions. Bet you didn't expect that. The Rock and Roll Express pulled a fast one here. They outsmarted Jimmy Cornette's evil plot. Great match. Great swerve with the rock and roll deal. I mean, it was a really fun little TV angle for the week. I don't want to say angle. We'll call it a storyline. And just think. You know, the whole thing lasted, what? Less than 20 minutes? It wasn't this overly convoluted 6-month plot with a million twists and turns and ridiculously multi-layered details. No, it's just a simple little TV story to help build a bigger payoff for down the road between the Midnight and the Rock and Roll. You know, for the people saying, oh, that's so stupid to hot potato the belts off the Midnights like that when they just won the straps not long ago. Yeah, well, those are the same people that probably think every world champion today needs to have the belt for 6 months to a year. So I take their opinion with a grain of salt. Nah, this is fine. It worked. Got over big with the fans in the Irish McNeil Boys Club. No complaints at all. And then we came back for Magnum TA versus Crusher Khrushchev. Boyd making sure to let everybody know, Khrushchev, he's a turncoat. Just to be relatively impartial. Anyway, well, I don't know what the fuck happened here. This is a very bizarre finish. Regardless of whether or not it was planned. So, they're having their match. Khrushchev's getting ready to set up Magnum for the over-the-shoulder backbreaker. But as he goes to lift Magnum up, the heel of his boot catches Alfred Neely in the jaw. So he takes a big bump and goes down. And then as Khrushchev stumbles into the ropes, Magnum immediately turns him over for a belly-to-belly. So Magnum has Khrushchev down for a pin. Neely stirs and makes his way over for a really slow 3 count. And apparently what they were trying to do was indicate that Magnum got the pinfall over Khrushchev. But because Neely was still groggy following him getting clipped by Magnum's boot, well, he doesn't sound for the bell afterwards. So now there's all this mass confusion over whether or not the match is supposed to continue. And Khrushchev goes into his trunks and pulls out a loaded glove to use on Magnum. And then Khrushchev puts an arm over Magnum's chest so Neely can count him down. And, well, Neely's looking right at him. He sees that Magnum is down in a pinning predicament. And Khrushchev's sort of looking at him like, dude, you gonna count the fucking pinfall or what? And it just leads to this really awkward few seconds where Khrushchev keeps waiting for something to happen. Finally, he just gets up and walks out. And everybody's left sitting there confused, including the announcers. And by the way, there was never any follow-up on this. They just moved on with the show. Well, that was strange. I mean, I think I see what they were going for here. I think it was one of those good idea in theory, bad in execution type situations. I mean, it just left a lot of superfluous downtime in between Neely getting taken out, counting the 3 for Magnum, and then everything else that happened afterward. Of course, nowadays, you couldn't do something like this because anytime a pinfall's counted in wrestling, the timekeeper immediately rings the bell without waiting for the official to call it. Some people might not even know about that. But that is supposed to happen. You're supposed to wait for the referee to cue the signal before you actually ring the bell. I mean, again, it's obviously storyline. That was pretty evident. I just don't think the execution came off the way it was probably intended. And/or it could have been formatted a little better. But we came back for Buddy Landel versus Stagger Lee. Stagger Lee sporting that JYD physique here in 1984. Wink, wink. So it went about a minute. Stagger hit the thump and got the pinfall pretty much immediately. And then after the bell, you see Hacksaw Reed hit the ring with a bucket of paint. Instantly, you knew what he was going to do. So Buddy picked the ankle of Stagger Lee so the heels could double team him. Well, admittedly, the exchange itself was not the smoothest. Some very clear miscommunication about what the dog was supposed to do before he went down. Like, Buddy's trying to yank him to the mat, and Stagger's just not going down. Finally, Butch gets impatient and just kicks him right in the gut. And then they pull his shirt over his head so they can expose his back for the paint job. There's also another really awkward moment where Butch Reed is waiting on the top rope to try to set up for the flying shoulder block. But he obviously doesn't want to just dive into Stagger Lee without him seeing it coming because, he's got his shirt pulled over his head. He's trying to wait for Stagger to look up so he can at least peripherally see the guy coming. I mean, Butch Reed's a dick, but he's not that much of a heartless bastard. Sure, he's about to paint the man yellow down his back, but he doesn't want to blindside him with a shoulder block. That's a bridge too far. So he's waiting up there for about an hour. And finally, Dog turns around and looks up in time to see Reed coming off for the flying shoulder tackle. And then they do the yellow streak down his back. A couple of the baby faces jog down and come to his aid before the heels walk away. We've seen them do the yellow streak deal with Butch before. Or as Bill Watts would say, they're painting him yellow. They're going to paint him yellow. That yellow streak down his back. I mean, it's a good heat angle. Probably hits differently depending on the time period you look at. You certainly couldn't do stuff like this today without causing a shitstorm. All the Karens would be suing the networks left and right. For a harmless heat angle, of course, but that's the nature of our culture these days. I mean, I guess my only criticism about it is that we literally saw Butch Reed do this exact same thing at the beginning of the year. Remember when he painted the dog? I mean, this is quite literally the same thing. Not trying to break kayfabe here, but duh. You know, say they did this angle back in 1983 when we hadn't seen it done for a while. Okay, yeah, it would have registered a little bit differently, because now it would have been fresh. But because we just saw it less than 4 months ago, I don't know, it just kind of seemed like a lather, rinse, repeat kind of heat angle. Not bad, just not very creative. Then we get Hacksaw Duggan and Jerry Gray. Before that, though, they used that time to re-air the footage they addressed at the beginning of the program. The Duggan-Khrushchev showdown where the Russians targeted Duggan's beard. And apparently they forgot to mention one important detail in that whole escapade. Do you remember how they informed us that Taylor owed Midsouth $2,500 for leaving the broadcast table to try to help Duggan? What they forgot to mention was that not only was Taylor unsuccessful in helping Duggan, but that he also got decimated and laid out by the heels. So he owed a fine and got his ass kicked. Yet he is perfectly content with paying Mid-South his dues. What an upstanding guy. So, well, they definitely shaved Duggan's beard. Didn't get all of it, though, so, I mean, how accurate of a hit job can you really call it? They basically gave him one of those square goatees where they shaved the sides but kept everything in the middle. If they were smart, they'd have tried to give him a chin strap look. Because I'll tell you, man, I've seen my fair share of beard designs. Ain't nobody's ever rocked a good chin strap. There's a reason it's commonly considered the most unattractive type of beard design. Unless you're Amish. That and the plain mustache. Anyway, did I mention Duggan beat Jerry Gray? Yeah, it took him about 45 seconds. It is actually crazy when you look at Duggan without a full beard. He looks like a totally different person. And again, they literally just shaved the sides. It's crazy. So when we come back, we have Mr. Wrestling and Mr. Wrestling 2 standing at ringside with Watts. And they have some grievances to air. Moreover, Mr. Wrestling has some grievances to air about rock music. This whole entire promo was fantastic. Angry, bitter, stick in the mud Mr. Wrestling never gets old. He's such a joy to watch when he's going on rants and tangents about anything. It's like listening to your grandfather complain about politics. And they're obviously relaying the situation we saw earlier with the Midnight Rock and Roll match. As we come to find out, Mr. Wrestling learned earlier in the day that somebody had broken into his car, vandalized it, and stolen his gear bag, which contained the 2 masks that Ricky and Robert wore to the ring. And I guess Mr. Wrestling had a spare mask he was wearing at the time. Or he keeps it at home. So, now that Mr. Wrestling knows it was the Rock and Roll Express that broke into his car, he's got a thing or two to say, not just about the Rock and Roll Express, but rock and roll, period. He thinks it stinks. All rockers do is smoke dope, pop pills, steal shit from other people, and cause corruption. Just like those no-good hoodlums Ricky and Robert did. And now here's a point where Bill Watts can't handle anymore. He's got to come to the aid of the rock and roll crew. Now listen, you can freely speak your mind, but when you're making general statements about a culture of people that enjoy genres of music, that's too far. These great people here at the Irish McNeil Boys Club love rock and roll. Hell, my sons love rock and roll. I love rock and roll on occasion. I love how that was the main talking point here. Bill Watts randomly coming to the defense of rock and roll music. But of course, the bigger picture here is, Mr. Wrestling knows that Ricky and Robert are responsible for vandalizing his property. And if it wasn't for them, they would be standing here right now as the Midsouth Tag Team Champions. I also find it great that even in Mr. Wrestling explaining his side of the story, which we have no reason to believe is false, by the way, Watts still has to try to come to the defense of the babyfaces, where he says, well, hold on a sec, we haven't heard their side of the story yet. Maybe there's a logical explanation to all this. Oh, right, of course. I mean, they are babyfaces after all. Surely their intent wasn't just to fuck around with the heels because it'd be funny. So that whole exchange was fantastic. By the way, just out of curiosity, if we're trying to suspend our disbelief for a minute here. So Jim Cornette went to Grizzly Smith, and he got 3 open contracts. Just out of curiosity, how did Ricky and Robert come to the knowledge of these open contracts? And moreover, how exactly did they know that Mr. Wrestling and Mr. Wrestling 2 were going to sign a contract? Or am I just overthinking all this? I could be. It just kind of came to mind as I was running through everything that happened this week. Now, of course, the whole time Mr. Wrestling and Wrestling 2 are ranting and raving here, there's a standby match waiting in the ring to happen. Of course, Mr. Wrestling doesn't give a fuck. So he and Hercules get in the ring while Boy's trying to do the ring introductions for Mike Jackson versus Randy Barber. Who cares about Mike Jackson? Direct quote from Mr. Wrestling here. I was so mad. Of all the fucking enhancement talent to bury on this show, you gotta pick on Mike Jackson. Randy Barber was standing right there. Come on, man. So Mr. Wrestling ends up sicking Hercules on Jackson and Barber. And like a caged animal, he just starts unloading on these guys, picking them up and throwing them around like lawn darts, muscling them around. I mean, this was definitely one of those moments where they wanted to let you know how big, mean, and strong Hercules Hernandez was. Indeed. And as the beatdown goes on, they try to send a couple officials down to cough, cough, break up the fight. Although they were highly unsuccessful. Actually, I don't think we ever found out. Because while all that was going down, they pitched to a Dr. Death video package in the middle of this murder scene. Guess they were able to scrape the dead bodies up during that 90-second clip. And then we had the show closer. And what a show closer it was. It's time to get a little more insight on the Super Date at the Superdome contest. And, I mean, it was a pretty cut and dry explanation from JR here. The idea is that there will be 2 winners to the contest, and whoever wins will not only get free tickets and hotel accommodations to see the Superdome event in June, but they will also win their date with the Rock and Roll Express. And of course, as JR is making this announcement, he is in the ring with Ricky, Robert, and what had to have been at least 20 girls that were in the Irish McNeil Boys Club that week. And I kid you not, that was probably only a quarter of the female attendees. Of course, they were all these super young and perky looking girls. I mean, nobody here was over the age of 30. So, all the elderly got screwed. Come on, man. Geriatrics gotta fuck too. So, yeah. Take a wild guess. What did the girls pop for more? Free tickets to the Superdome show, or a potential date with Ricky and Robert? If you guessed potential date, congratulations. You officially figured out Female Psyche 101. Hot guys with great bodies. We might get to fuck. Even though that option was not on the table. I guess the only thing I wonder, the super analyst in me that has to pick apart everything. We know they're picking 2 winners. Clearly one is going to go with Ricky and the other will go with Robert. What happens if one girl decides that she wants to date Ricky but she gets stuck with Robert? Who decides which girl dates which member of the Rock and Roll? Do they have to fight it out? I have a lot of questions about this contest. As did Ricky and Robert, I'm sure. Such as, are we getting paid extra for this? Do these girls understand that we're not going to make babies with them? I'm sure they all thought it through. What could possibly go wrong? 2 young, good-looking chaps with high levels of testosterone dating complete strange women who are clearly only entering this contest because they want to fuck these guys. Sounds like a great night. Hopefully they remember to bring condoms. But there you have it. Another fun episode in the Midsouth Library. Obviously, they're going hard with the Rock and Roll Midnight Push. And you think about it, that really is about to become one of the central storylines for the remainder of the year. I mean, they did some stuff in the interim to try to tease the big program. You know, Ricky and Robert shoving Cornette's face in the cake a while back. But if you think about it, they didn't really advance much in the way of the Midnights focusing all their effort and energy going after the Rock and Roll. I mean, they've been so busy feuding with guys like Bill Watts and Stagger Lee. Obviously, they were finishing up their beef with Mr. Wrestling and Magnum TA. So they've had a lot of other side projects going on. But now there's a reason for the Midnights to solely target the Rock and Roll. They got their damn belts stolen. And you know Corny's going to be talking to Mama Cornette to get that legal counsel going. Try to invalidate everything about that 3rd round in the open contract series. But yeah, overall good show. I'm liking the direction of where they're taking the Terry Taylor, Hacksaw Duggan, Russian storyline. You know, it's hard for them to top the content they were putting out a month or so back. I mean, that was just peak Mid-South 1984 booking. But they're still white hot, man, and You got plenty more great stuff in the months to come. All right, world class. By the way, has anybody ever had apple cider vinegar from Ohio? It's got a sour taste to it. It's not bad, it's just wasn't expecting it. You know what's funny about this show? I miss a week of Midsouth television. I'm scrambling to double up on notes and make sure I'm paying extra careful to everything that's going on because, there's so much detail that I want to make sure that I don't miss. And then world class, it's like, well, we missed last week. Did it really matter in the grand scheme of things? Probably not. If anything important occurred, they didn't touch on it in any kind of recap. So it must have been a very paint-by-numbers episode last week. Speaking of paint-by-numbers, how's this for a cold prelim opener? Jerry Allen versus Steve Simpson. Of course, at the time of this particular taping block, the Parade of Champions event was the following day. So this was Bill Mercer's opportunity to really hard sell the show 24 hours beforehand. And we'll be seeing clips on tape delay probably within the next couple weeks. We did get confirmation here that it'll be Bruiser Brody getting the world title shot with Rick Rude. Or against Rick Rude, I should say. Apparently they decided not to let it be a surprise for the actual show. They counted all the fan votes. Brody was the one that tallied the most votes. Which isn't really all that shocking. If it wasn't him, I would have suspected either Iceman or Chris Adams. We also heard that Missy Hyatt and Sunshine are apparently going to be having a mud wrestling match. Well then, that'll get all the straight horny men on the edge of their seats. Missy and Sunshine are going to be half naked rolling around in mud? Sign me up for that shit. I know I'm sort of just glossing over this entire match. The wrestling was fine, but it was basically a babyface match. Allen was sort of the de facto heel when he was working over Simpson in the middle. I wouldn't really call it him getting the heat. He was just sort of doing a collection of random moves. And while they were well executed, delayed verticals, body slams, snapmare takeovers, it was just kind of hit a move, hit another move, hit another move. It was very video game-like in quality. Until Simpson finally came off the top of the crossbody and got the 3. I don't recall hearing Mercer mentioning anything about Simpson being on the Texas Stadium card. But considering how much I've been pushing him in underneath matches recently, I'd be surprised not to see him in some type of prelim match. Guess we'll see when they air the footage over the next few weeks. We then had Rick Rude in a non-title match with Brian Adias. By the way, did anybody else completely forget that Adias was the Texas Heavyweight Champion? Moreover, did anybody else forget that Brian Adias existed? I wish it could have been permanent. You know what I love about Rick Rude in leopard print skin-tight pants? It's not just the fact that he looks so damn good wearing them. It's the fact that it doesn't make him look any less manly. Very, very few men in this industry could ever pull that look off. Rick Rude, he is among the few men on that very short list. The match is alright. Although Brian Diaz is not exactly the most compelling babyface in peril. There was a weird spot here, and I don't know if it was a botch by Diaz or if he just couldn't figure out what Rude was trying to do. Rude grabs him in a hammerlock hold, and he was clearly trying to drag him to the corner so he could ram Diaz's shoulder into the middle turnbuckle. Diaz could literally not figure out how to bump for this. Rude had to do it twice, and it still looked fucked up the second time. So I blame Diaz for that. This also had the issue where Diaz was in one of his I have to get my shit in moods. So even though it's supposed to mainly be a showcase match for Rude, Diaz can't help but try to cut off Rude and make comebacks at certain points where it made virtually no sense for him to do so. As you can tell, I'm not very keen on Brian Diaz. Never have been. I get he was good friends with the Von Erichs. He was a good hand to have on the roster. He could work a little bit. To me, he's like Johnny Mantel. Just because you happen to be brothers with the booker, it doesn't mean you should be going to 10-minute time limit draws with all the fucking top guys in the territory. Mantel was always an underneath guy no matter how much they tried to push the agenda that he could hang with all the top guys. Diaz is like one of those guys to me. Just because he can go toe-to-toe with the world champion doesn't mean he should. And I don't give a crap what historians try and argue. Oh, Brian was great. No, he wasn't. He was mid. Average at best. And anyone that tries to claim otherwise needs to go back and watch more Brian Diaz footage. So then we return for pretty cool little hype package for the Missy Sunshine feud. It was... Bill Mercer, for some reason, called it a survey. I didn't really know what he was talking about. It was a compilation of previous encounters between Sunshine and Missy from previous World Class episodes. A couple of these I know we reviewed recently. They are the match from a while back when Missy and Sunshine were in a mixed tag with John Tatum and Scott Casey. That was a match where Missy's singlet was wedged so far up her ass, the entire match consisted of people doing the sexy whistle to her. And then there was a match when they had the Grappler and Tatum wrestling the Fantastics. That was where Sunshine grabbed French fries from the vendor at ringside and shoved them in Missy's face. The one we didn't cover, and maybe this was what aired last week, it was a confrontation with Tatum and Sunshine. I don't know where it was shot from, but it clearly wasn't at the Sportatorium. What ended up happening was Tatum was running her up the flagpole, and then Missy ran up from behind and pie-faced Sunshine. And I do mean a literal pie. Like, Three Stooges slapstick pie to the face. Only this wasn't comedy. This was degrading and very upsetting to see. Poor Sunshine getting humiliated like that. And of course the heels had a good laugh at her expense. Tatum grabbed Sunshine to restrain her so Missy could give her a couple paintbrush slaps. So things have very much escalated with the beef here. It is kind of unique when you think about World Class in 1986. Actually, the Sunshine Missy stuff dates back even a little before that. I think late 85 is when they started interacting together on TV. But when you think about top programs or hot feuds in Dallas over the last 6 months, I mean, if you were to argue that Sunshine and Missy are at the top of that list, I wouldn't say you're wrong. Gino and Chris was pretty hot too at one point, but unfortunately Gino passing away in February put everything there to a screeching halt. So we never really got any kind of suitable payoff. The Sunshine Missy feud is probably the biggest program since late 85, early 86. It's been going on for a long time, and it's a white-hot program. The people love seeing those two interact together. And again, I still wouldn't say it surpasses the Sunshine Precious feud when Jimmy Garvin was still around, but I've definitely enjoyed the program. It's been great stuff. You know, again, the people have virtually loved every interaction they've seen with them have together. And I am genuinely looking forward to seeing their mud match. Not for the reasons you're probably thinking of, although, well, yeah, two very attractive women in swimsuits is not exactly the most unappealing thing for men. But, you know, to me, it's the perfect comeuppance stipulation match for Sunshine to finally get a revenge on Missy. And, you know, the whole program's been about degradation and humiliation, which is exactly how it's going to end. In the mud pit. The way God intended. Then we had Steve Regal taking on Kerry Von Erich, aka the match where Bill Mercer had the revelation that when Kerry takes off his ring jacket, the girls cream themselves. He's like, you ever notice how crazy everybody goes when Kerry shows his body? Yes, Bill. Look at him. Not to try and quote David Crockett here, but literally, look at him. How would you not expect the girls to pop for a body like that? Oddly enough, I really didn't write a whole lot down about this match. It was good, but like, I mean, there literally wasn't anything to talk about aside from the finish. I mean, they basically did several minutes of boring chain wrestling until Kerry grabbed Regal in the stomach for the claw hold. At which point, he then hoisted Regal over his shoulder with the claw hold still applied. And then he turned Regal over and slammed him down to the mat and pinned him. It was 7.5 minutes of nothing, followed by 30 seconds of, wow, that was pretty fucking cool. I did not expect Kerry to lift up Regal via his abdomen and hold him overhead for several seconds, and then just throw him down to the ground like a sack of potatoes. Not that it's an eye-opener that Kerry was very strong, but, yeah, that's all I got with that one. And then for our main event, which is already in progress by the time we came back, another one of those newfangled, let's put two obscure babyfaces and two obscure heels together in a tag match and see what the fuck happens. I think we had one of those a couple weeks ago on TV. Of course, now I can't even remember the participants, but wasn't it like Missing Link and Lance Von Erich versus Buddy Roberts and John Tatum? Or maybe it was another heel that teamed with Buddy. Point is, it was an interesting matchup. So this week's main event, it's Bruiser Brody and the Missing Link versus Terry Gordy and the Great Kabuki. And we obviously know all the bad blood between Gordy and Brody. They've been hitting each other with everything but the kitchen sink over the last month. So when they come back from commercial, they were already brawling on the floor and basically using every implement in sight to try to maim each other. And they very quickly fought off to the outskirts of the Sportatorium. which in turn made the match a Missing Link versus Great Kabuki singles bout, with Michael Hayes conspicuously coming out to watch at ringside. And as they're having their match, Link manages to find a way to break free of Kabuki's nerve hold, so Hayes can pass Kabuki a set of nunchucks, and then Kabuki immediately went after Link with the nunchucks for the DQ. And while he had Link isolated in this nerve hold, Sunshine passed Link a chair so he could throw Kabuki across the ring, and I was going to say use the chair. He used the chair. He just didn't use it on Kabuki. He used it on himself. Because, well, the Missing Link isn't exactly the sharpest knife in the drawer, if you know what I mean. So, yeah, it was a main event of some description. Typically, I've never been a fan of, let's have two guys involved in a match and then immediately shit-can their involvement 5 seconds after the opening bell. Then we never see them again. I don't know, it just kind of seemed like false advertising on their part to promote Terry Gordy and Bruiser Brody for the main event. And then we see them for like 10 seconds before they disappear and never come back. What we got was fine, just not what I think a lot of people were hoping for. At that point, he may as well have just done Kabuki and Link in a singles match and booked some kind of separate angle with Gordy and Brody somewhere else on the show. Whatever. They're setting up a big lights out deal between those two for Texas Stadium. I think Mercer said it's going to be some kind of barbed wire match. Some kind of street fight. No DQ stipulation. So we are going to get a culmination to that feud. Even though Gordy's still going to be wrestling in the six-man against the Von Erichs for the titles. So he's got his hands full. Overall, I would say the show was effective in promoting the Parade of Champions for the following day. And we'll cover more of the event as we see it unfold on tape delay. What I will say is, doing some compare and contrast with attendance figures since they started the David Memorial event in May. Think about this. In 1984, they drew about 32,000 people to Texas Stadium for the first annual Parade of Champions. And of course, that was a few months after David died. It's where we saw Kerry beat Flair for the World Heavyweight title in the main event, which got them a ton of publicity at the time. It was a huge deal. Fast forward to 1985, they drew about 26,000. Slightly down for the main event with Flair and Kevin Von Erich, which, as we all remember, was barely advertised on television to begin with. But it was still a pretty big match on paper. And now we're here in 1986. The final attendance figure was documented at a little over 24,000. So, you go from 32,000, 26,000, 24,000. Obvious drop-off as the year goes by, or as the years go by. 1987 is the real story. 5,900. Yeah. 5,900 people for that event. 1 year after this one. It's very telling. And as much as things may not seem bad right now, I talked about it back in January. 1986 was a major turning point for world class. And not in a good way. Business may have seemed relatively stable and fine all the way through the beginning of the year. But 86 was the real downturn. There's a lot of stuff that transpired. The NWA withdrawal, the rebranding to World Class Wrestling Association, Obviously, them about to lose Kerry later in the year to the motorcycle accident. And again, it was all due to the lack of fan interest. And I think this is kind of the year where people started to really lose faith in the company. It's an absolute disaster, both financially and publicity-wise. Of course, we haven't even talked about Mike yet. He's not even really back full-time. You know, we do have a few things to look forward to in the short term. I think seeing the footage of Texas Stadium over the next few weeks will paint a positive picture, but it's everything that happens afterwards is just a steady decline. But we will keep chugging through the library and cover it all. So, the deal for Monday is that I'm going to record both Retro Raw and the In Your House pay-per-view sometime over the weekend. I'm probably going to skip a day and actually upload it a little later on Sunday night. Because Monday I'm not going to have access to a computer and I'm going to be gone through pretty much all of next week. I still don't know how I'm going to handle next week's Friday show. I think what I'm going to have to do is record stuff and try to edit maybe on Friday. You know, I may have to do like a delayed upload on Saturday at some point. I'm going to have to think it through because I'm not going to be able to record anything throughout the week, and that's typically when I sit down and try to break up all the audio segments. But it's going to be a challenge. I'll keep you posted. I want to do a show next week because we got the WrestleWar pay-per-view to talk about, and I don't want to miss out on that. You know, if worse comes to worse, I might have to just maybe skip another week on World Class or Midsouth, or maybe leave out something. I could feasibly fit in a WrestleWar pay-per-view and maybe a Midsouth review. I don't know. I gotta think about it over the next several days. But that will all be for next week. So stay posted for all that. Until then, take care, everybody. Peace out.